Grandpa wanted to prove that humans and snakes can also have children across species. He forcibly locked me and a snake in a coffin. Starving with thirst, I even thought the snake was handsome, so I spent the whole night with it in the coffin. Afterward I fell asleep completely exhausted. But when I woke up again, the snake had turned into a beautiful woman, and her belly was swelling up. When Grandpa saw this, he wasn't worried at all. He just clapped his hands and cheered. Even said he would treat the villagers to a meal to celebrate. But all of this goes back to the day I was born. I was born with an extremely unlucky fate. Grandpa, who knew a little about feng shui, had me sleep in a coffin since I was little. The other kids in the village knew about this and isolated me. They said only dead people sleep in coffins. At first I thought I would live a lonely life. Until the year I turned 6 when I met a blue snake. It completely changed my fate. That night the villagers were carrying flashlights, seemingly searching for something, but Grandpa had told me not to go outside after dark. So out of curiosity I opened the window. Just as I opened the window, a blue snake slithered into my room. I stood there staring at it in shock. It had wounds on its body still bleeding. Moved by pity I decided to help it. It seemed to understand me and didn't harm me. I quickly hid it inside the coffin where I slept. Just then someone knocked on my door. It was Grandpa asking from outside. "Mosey, did you see anything come into the room?" I pretended to be sleepy and answered no. The villagers outside left after that. After they left, the snake poked its head out, nodded at me as a thank you. From that night on, I slept with it in my arms every night. And this continued for 6 whole years. Until the night before my 12th birthday. Grandpa came into my room holding a candle and said, "Mosey, the next 7 nights are crucial. If you survive you'll live. If not, it's your fate." I looked at Grandpa in confusion and asked, "Grandpa, what do you mean by all this?" Grandpa sighed. "Do you know why I made you sleep in a coffin since you were little? Because you were born with an extremely unlucky fate. This fate means that your life will be taken by ghosts. Once you turn 12 tonight, this fate will fully manifest. At that time, all the wandering souls and ghosts around will try to take your body." "Grandpa, is that true? Please don't scare me," I said trembling. Grandpa lifted the blanket covering the coffin. It revealed many protective talismans. "I made you sleep in the coffin because when you sleep your yang energy decreases. The yin energy inside you will be released. The talismans around this coffin lock the yin energy to prevent wandering spirits from noticing it. But now you are old enough for your fate to show. The talismans can no longer suppress it. Now we can only pray that there aren't too many wandering souls nearby." I silently looked at Grandpa. I had some doubts in my heart, but in the end I nodded. After Grandpa left, I lay in the coffin as usual. That night I couldn't sleep at all. I just tightly hugged the snake until morning. The good thing was the next day nothing happened to me. But 6 people in the village suddenly died. And after they died, scales appeared on their bodies. This caused a huge stir. Some people mentioned the blue snake from 6 years ago. When I heard them talk about the blue snake, I immediately thought of the one in my coffin. The scales on the dead villagers were similar to its own. That day everyone in the village came to my house, asking Grandpa to do something. I was almost sure by now that the deaths of those 6 people were connected to me, and the snake in my coffin. I quickly went to my room. The snake was still there. "Did you kill those people?" I asked it scared. It shook its head at me. Then it rested its head on my shoulder. Its gesture calmed me down a little. I kept telling myself, that snake had always been in my coffin. It never had time to harm the people in the village. Outside it was very noisy. The villagers were talking over each other, urging Grandpa to think of a solution. By noon the villagers finally left. I then went outside. I heard Grandpa looking worried say, "To strike the snake, strike the heart. For the snake to become a demon it needs 7 souls to assist. Now 6 have died. 1 more will die. If the snake truly becomes a demon, the whole village will be finished." "1 more will die?" I asked in surprise. Grandpa nodded. The 6 dead people were the ones who had hurt the snake back then. The last person has no idea who the snake will harm. I remembered when the snake crawled into the house. It did have a few wounds on it. Thinking about this I quickly asked, "Grandpa, are we sure those 6 people were killed by the snake?" Grandpa shook his head and said, "Actually, when a snake is about to become a demon it doesn't need to act itself. Even if it's hiding in a cave it can still harm people." I suddenly stood up straight, my face pale. After a moment of silence I gritted my teeth and told Grandpa about the snake. "Actually, that snake has always been in my coffin." Grandpa slammed his hand on the table looking furious. "What did you say?" I told Grandpa everything, the whole story. After hearing it Grandpa became completely enraged. He raised his hand and slapped me. I was still young back then. The slap stunned me. I opened my mouth and started crying uncontrollably. Grandpa didn't care about my crying and fussing. He grabbed me and dragged me to the room. When we got to the coffin and looked inside, the snake was already gone. Grandpa looked at me coldly and said, "Ghostly disasters can be avoided. But I have no way of dealing with demonic disasters. There's no point in searching anymore. Tonight just wait to die." After hearing Grandpa I stubbornly said, "Grandpa, it won't harm me." Grandpa didn't say anything more. Grandpa quickly took out a willow branch and chased me around the house hitting me. While hitting me he muttered, Children don't understand. They've offended the Great One. Great One, please forgive. By the time he finished, I passed out from the pain. Grandpa then threw me onto the bed. He left the room soon after. When I woke up in the middle of the night from the pain, I realized I couldn't move. Looking closely, my hands and feet were tied with willow branches. I shouted for Grandpa, but there was no response. Just then, a beautiful woman in a blue kippah entered the room. Who are you? Why are you here? I stared at the woman and asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she moved forward and kissed me. I instinctively pulled back and asked, Fairy sister, are you here to see my grandpa? I'm not looking for your grandpa. I'm here for you. Her voice was sweet. I felt a bit flustered. But I don't know you. You'll get to know me. She said this while gently touching the wounds on my body, smiling softly. Then she bent down and stuck out her tongue. She lightly licked my wound. A tingling sensation spread through me. I couldn't help but exhale. It felt so good, though my hands and feet were tied. It didn't stop the joy Fairy sister brought me. At that moment I had a naughty thought. Fairy sister, could you untie the willow branches for me? She smiled and shook her head. Then she gave me a seductive look. Little brother, am I beautiful? Do you want me? I'm sure you're not interested in what happened next. So let's skip over 3,000 words. Afterwards she looked at me with satisfaction and said, Little brother, we will meet again. Just forget today ever happened. You mustn't tell anyone. When you grow up, I'll marry you. I was so excited I asked, stumbling over my words. Fairy sister, are you really going to marry me? It's true, I'm not lying to you. But you can't tell anyone about us. Not even your grandpa. Understand? As soon as she finished speaking, I felt a wave of drowsiness and instantly fell asleep. Next morning I was woken up by a bucket of cold water. Grandpa was standing in front of me coldly saying, This is bad. The wound has already scabbed over after one night. Hurry up and get up, we need to go. I was about to ask Grandpa where we were going, but my consciousness blurred again. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself in a strange room. An old man was standing in front of me staring at me. He opened my jaw and said, Your eyes are dull, your forehead is yellow. Your tongue is black, your lips are purple. Within 7 days you will die suddenly. Brother Zhao, this kid's life seems to be coming to an end. Grandpa's face turned pale as he shot me a look. Old brother Hu, this grandson of mine has no parents. He hasn't had a good life following me. Please, old brother Hu, show us the way. Give me a solution. Old Grandpa Hu looked at me and sighed. The wound is scabbed but the pain remains. This is a sign of rejection. Brother Zhao, you've almost beaten him to death. And the Snake Immortal still hasn't given up. This shows that the Snake Immortal is determined to take his life. Grandpa nodded. I know what you're saying. But I still know a little about ghostly affairs. You're better at handling demon matters than I am. Grandpa Hu furrowed his brow and continued. But now 6 people are dead. The 7th will be the snake demon's cycle. If you want to avoid this disaster, you must find him a wife, a powerful protector. Only then will the Snake Immortal be wary. Grandpa froze for a moment after hearing this. Then his expression kept changing. Old brother Hu, are you talking about a ghost marriage? Grandpa Hu nodded. Since ancient times when demons and ghosts meet, neither survives. We need to find him a female ghost as a bride. Grandpa shook his head after hearing this. But with his extremely yin fate, if he marries a ghost, I'm afraid he'll die even faster. Grandpa Hu shook his head. The snake demon's demand for life cannot be undone. An extremely yin fate is broken by a ghost. If they marry in a ghost marriage, they will be able to survive after the wedding night. Moreover, that snake demon has been with him for 7 years, staying with him every night. If it takes his life and turns into a demon, the snake demon's powers will increase by decades. By then no one will be able to defeat it. Grandpa pondered for a moment, then slowly nodded. When I heard old Liang say this, I gritted my teeth and sat up despite the pain. I stubbornly said, I don't want a female ghost bride. Grandpa Hu smiled. Little kid, you misunderstand. This ghost bride is to help protect you from disasters. It won't affect your future marriage. When I heard this, my eyes lit up. Grandpa, is it true? Grandpa nodded. Of course it's true. Do you really think a female ghost will stay with you for life? They will also need to reincarnate. At that time I felt particularly frustrated. I could only say, then find me a pretty one. I want to choose myself. You still want a pretty one? If any female ghost will marry you, you should be grateful. You made your own mess, now you have to bear the consequences. Grandpa didn't mind discouraging me. Soul tied to the Buddha ghosts in love with play. Brother Zhao, you should quickly contact a theater troupe that performs ghost plays. Grandpa Hu hurriedly told Grandpa. Grandpa nodded after hearing it and went out. Grandpa Hu then brought some offerings. He took me to a graveyard 5 miles away to summon ghosts. He waited until it got dark before starting to examine the tombstones. We needed to see if the tomb held a male or a female. If it was a female, we would check how old she was when she passed. Any woman over 25 was usually ignored. In rural areas, women over 25 were already married. A woman who married before death cannot have a ghost marriage. We searched through more than 10 graves. Finally we found a 22-year-old woman. Grandpa Hu took out an apple. He lit an incense stick and said, tomorrow night at the stroke of midnight, at the entrance of Yingfu village there will be a divine performance. Firecrackers will be the signal. If the young lady is interested she can come and watch. Grandpa Hu then made me bow 3 times in front of the grave. Then we continued searching for the next suitable grave. We visited over 10 graves that night. By the time we returned home it was already noon. The ghost play troupe had already arrived. Grandpa and the villagers were setting up the stage. I quietly sat on a small stool, watching Grandpa and the villagers explain that they were using my life to lure the snake demon and eliminate it. As the stage neared completion, Grandpa was preparing the meal. He killed the last 2 hens. While helping pluck the feathers I asked, "Grandpa, will this work?" Grandpa sighed and said, "Although I can't guarantee it will let you survive. If we don't do this you will definitely die." After the meal the people who helped with the stage left. Only 8 of us remained in the yard. Grandpa Hu and I. The rest were the actors from the ghost play troupe. But I didn't expect that among them there was someone who looked just like a fairy sister. However, we had an agreement. We couldn't acknowledge each other if we met. So I didn't go up to greet her. The rules of the ghost play troupe were clear. They first helped me into a groom's outfit. They set up 15 banquet tables. I sat at the center. The tables were covered with cloth. They placed incense burners, raw meat and fruits. On the long bench they used stones to weigh down a stack of yellow paper money. On the table in front of me there were only 2 items. One was our family's heirloom jade pendant. Under the jade pendant was my birth date. At this moment the one who looked like the fairy sister walked over. She naturally sat next to me. "Little brother, do you still remember me?" As soon as she said this I was sure she was the fairy sister. "You really are the fairy sister." I didn't tell Grandpa about us. But Grandpa said, "The only way to keep it a secret is to marry a female ghost." I carefully said, "Your grandpa is right. I won't blame you. Are you afraid of finding a ghost bride?" Fairy sister asked with a smile. "I'm not afraid at all." "Fairy sister, are you afraid?" I said firmly. The fairy sister shook her head. "Actually I can see ghosts. They just don't know it. And ghosts aren't scary at all. By the way, do you have any requirements for your ghost bride?" "I don't have any requirements. As long as she's not scary. If possible I hope she's a bit more beautiful." The fairy sister said oh and suddenly looked at me seriously. "Little brother, I still don't know your name." I replied, "My name is Zhao Mo." Mo as in silence. The fairy sister grinned eerily when she heard my name. "That was your old name. After the ghost play you won't be called that anymore. Because after the ghost play, you will need to change your name. I don't know why you have to change your name. By the way, my last name is also Zhao. My name is Zhao Yixian." Yixian as in fairy, the fairy sister said as she stood up. Then she looked at the old man on the stage who was waving at her. "Grandpa is calling me. The ghost play is about to begin. Don't be afraid, little one. Ghosts really aren't scary." She turned and walked toward the stage. At this moment Grandpa Hu walked over and said to me, "No matter what happens later you don't need to be afraid. The female ghosts we invited will come to observe you. If anyone picks up this jade pendant in front of you, it means they agree to marry you. Then you just go to the bedroom to consummate the marriage." "Can ghosts consummate marriage?" I asked trembling. "Yes. You don't need to be afraid. Just do as she says when the time comes. If you're unlucky and encounter a deadly ghost, then it's just your bad luck. But the chances of that happening are small, because they generally don't harm those they've chosen." Grandpa Hu said, then picked up the paper money from the ground and began to burn it. By the time the paper money was burned it was already midnight. At this time he lit incense and set off firecrackers at the door. A man and a woman from the opera troupe also came out. They were dressed in funeral clothes, their faces painted pale. As soon as they appeared the woman shouted in a sharp voice, "Midnight ghost play. Honored gods, please take your seats. Today's play is The Widow Visits the Grave." The female performer just announced the play. The male actor suddenly took out a knife. He stabbed his chest with a sharp straight motion. Blood sprayed out and he collapsed to the ground. Then a cold wind blew in through the courtyard door. The stone on the chair holding yellow paper fell to the ground. The yellow paper was lifted by an invisible force onto the table. As time passed, female ghosts we invited last night had all taken their seats. The female performer on stage was now lying on top of the male performer. She wailed loudly in a shrill voice. My scalp tingled, and I kept feeling like someone was touching me. I don't know how long it had been, when suddenly a round of applause echoed around me. I looked up. At this point the ghost play had finished. The female performer again shouted in a high-pitched voice. The play Widow Visits the Grave has concluded. Next is the second play. Yin Wife Yang Husband. The groom is already among the gods. His birth date has been presented. If anyone is interested please accept the betrothal gift and become his yin-yang spouse. If none of you are interested, thank you all for coming. After the female performer finished speaking she retreated backstage. The others on stage also all went back inside. The courtyard fell silent. At this moment I was so scared I was about to collapse. I was covered in cold sweat. Suddenly the table made a series of knocking sounds. I was so frightened that I jumped straight up from the bench. Around the jade pendant a dozen ghostly hands appeared. At the same time as I jumped up, 2 hands were placed on my shoulders. They pushed me back down onto the bench. Sisters, what does this mean? I was trembling, scared out of my wits. The extremely yin destiny is mine. No one has paid respects to me in decades. This little brat belongs to me. You all get out. I died young, so he's mine. Since that's the case, let's tear him apart and share. I almost fainted from fear as I heard these voices. I stammered, asking, what do you mean by this? It means they all have their eyes on you. At this moment the playful voice of Zhao Yixian rang out. Before I could speak, Zhao Yixian snapped. There's only one groom. You can't all have him. The prettiest one stays. The rest of you get lost. As soon as Zhao Yixian said this, the dozen or so hands immediately left only one. You're mine. A terrifying voice echoed in my ears.